The train lurched forward as Mark Davis wedged himself into the nearest empty seat, his attention split between his laptop and the phone pressed to his ear. "Mom, I promise I'll be there by dinner," he said, fingers still typing an email. His mother's voice crackled through the speaker, warm with anticipation. "I've made your favorite pot roast, the one with those little potatoes you loved as a boy." Mark smiled despite himself, but when his other phone buzzed with an incoming call from his CFO, that smile vanished. "Mom, can you hold on just 1 second? I need to take this." He didn't wait for her answer before switching calls, never noticing as the train picked up speed that the cityscape outside his window was giving way to unfamiliar countryside, carrying him miles further from the woman who had spent all morning preparing for a son who wouldn't arrive. "Davis speaking," Mark said, his voice automatically shifting to his CEO tone. "Mark, the Henderson deal is falling apart. Their lawyers are pulling back on 3 key points." The familiar stress tightened around Mark's shoulders as he pulled up the contract on his laptop. The next 40 minutes disappeared into negotiations and damage control, his other phone forgotten on the seat beside him. It wasn't until the train slowed for its first stop that Mark glanced up from his screen, expecting to see the outskirts of Chicago. Instead, rolling hills and farmland stretched beyond the window. "What the—" Mark grabbed his ticket from his pocket, his stomach dropping as he realized his mistake. In his distraction, he'd boarded the westbound train to some place called Pine Creek instead of the northbound to Chicago, where his mother waited. No, he muttered, checking his watch. The last 3 hours had carried him in exactly the wrong direction. He grabbed his phone to call his mother, but the screen showed no signal. "Perfect," Mark growled, drawing a curious glance from the elderly woman across the aisle. The train pulled into a small station that seemed to belong to another century. Wooden platform, hand-painted sign, not an electronic display in sight. Nothing like the sleek, modern stations Mark was accustomed to. Mark approached the lone station attendant, a bearded man with weathered skin who looked up from his newspaper with unhurried interest. "When's the next train back?" Mark demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Back where?" the man asked, unfazed by Mark's tone. "Back to the city. I'm on the wrong train." The attendant checked a printed schedule. "Tomorrow morning, 6:15. "Tomorrow? There has to be another train today." "Afraid not. This is our last service for the day." Mark ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time since his morning shower. "Is there a car service?" "Uber. Anything." The man laughed. "In Pine Creek? Best we've got is Tom's taxi, but he's taking his grandkids fishing until Sunday." The weight of his situation sank in. Mark was stuck in a town he'd never heard of, his mother was waiting with a cooling pot roast, and the Henderson deal was hanging by a thread. He stepped outside the station, desperate for a cell signal. The small town before him looked like a postcard. A main street lined with shops, American flags hanging from porches, people strolling without the hurried pace of city life. Mark held his phone up, walking in circles for a signal. "Come on," he muttered. "You won't get reception here," a voice said from behind him. "The tower's been down for maintenance since yesterday." Mark turned to find a woman about his age watching him with amusement. She wore jeans and a simple blue blouse, her brown hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. No makeup, no designer clothes, just an easy confidence that seemed out of place to Mark. "There has to be a landline somewhere," Mark said, already calculating how many important calls he would miss. "The diner has one," she offered, pointing down the street. "I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Miller." "Mark Davis," he replied automatically, not extending his hand as he normally would. "Which way to the diner?" If Sarah was offended by his brusqueness, she didn't show it. "I'm headed that way. I'll show you." They walked in silence, Mark still trying his phone every few steps. The town was nothing like the urban landscape he navigated daily. No towering skyscrapers, no honking taxis, no crowds of people rushing to important meetings. Just quiet shops, the distant sound of children playing, and a pace that felt painfully slow. "So, wrong train?" Sarah asked as they walked. "Obviously," Mark replied, then caught himself. "Sorry, yes, I was supposed to be going to Chicago to visit my mother." That's quite a detour, Sarah said with a small smile. Pine Creek is about as far from Chicago as you can get, in more ways than one. They reached a small diner with a neon "open" sign flickering in the window. The smell of coffee and fresh pie wafted from the door. "Phone's in the back," Sarah said. "Good luck with your calls." Mark nodded his thanks and hurried inside, already drafting explanations in his head. He didn't notice Sarah watching him go, a curious expression on her face. He didn't see how the sunlight caught her eyes or the way she seemed to belong to this place. Mark Davis was too busy trying to fix his mistake to notice that sometimes the wrong train can take you exactly where you need to be. The diner's landline was an ancient rotary model Mark hadn't seen outside of movies. He dialed his mother's number, wincing at the slow return of each digit before he could input the next. "Hello?" His mother's voice sounded smaller than usual. "Mom, it's me. I'm so sorry, but I got on the wrong train." Mark pressed the receiver closer, lowering his voice as other diners glanced his way. "I ended up in some small town called Pine Creek." "Oh, Mark." The disappointment in her voice made his chest tighten. "The pot roast is already done." "I know, Mom. I really messed up. I was distracted with work and—" "It's always work, isn't it?" The gentle rebuke stung more than anger would have. "Well, what time will you get here tomorrow?" Mark calculated quickly. "If I catch the 6:15 train, I should be there by early afternoon." "I'll save the pot roast then." Her voice brightened slightly. "Maybe this is good. You sound like you need a break from the city anyway." After promising again to arrive the next day, Mark hung up and called his assistant to handle the Henderson situation. With both calls complete, he turned to find Sarah sitting at a nearby booth, a steaming mug between her hands. "Everything sorted?" she asked. Mark hesitated, then slid into the seat across from her. "As much as it can be. Know any hotels around here?" "We have one bed and breakfast, but Mary's probably booked with the fishing tournament this weekend." Sarah took a sip of her coffee. "I'd offer my couch, but I'm guessing a CEO prefers something a bit more executive." Mark raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know I'm a CEO?" "Small town," Sarah shrugged. "We notice things. The way you walk, those shoes that cost more than my car, the fact that you've checked both your phones 17 times since we met." A waitress approached, setting a coffee in front of Mark without him ordering. "Sarah said you might need this," she explained. "Thanks," Mark said, surprised. "Do you own this place?" he asked Sarah after the waitress left. "No, I run the bookstore down the street." She pointed through the window to a small shop with a faded green awning. "Nothing as impressive as whatever company you run." Something in her tone wasn't exactly judging, but wasn't admiring either. It was a novelty for Mark. Most people either fawned over his success or resented it. Sarah seemed to simply acknowledge it as a fact, like his height or hair color. "Davis Technologies," he said, suddenly wanting her to know. "We develop software for financial institutions." "Sounds thrilling," Sarah replied, the corner of her mouth twitching. "It pays the bills," Mark said defensively. "I'm sure it does more than that," Sarah said. "But is it worth missing dinner with your mom?" The question caught Mark off guard. Before he could respond, the bell above the diner door jingled as an elderly man entered, his face lighting up when he spotted Sarah. "There's my favorite bookkeeper," he called, approaching their table. "Hey, Tom," Sarah smiled warmly. "Mark, this is Tom Baker. He owns the taxi service I mentioned, though he's currently playing hooky." "Grandpa duties?" Tom nodded solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Sarah, we still on for the town meeting tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it," she assured him. As Tom waved goodbye and headed to the counter, Mark found himself curious. "Town meeting?" "Monthly tradition," Sarah explained. "Part business, part social. Tonight's about the summer festival budget." "Sounds riveting," Mark said, his sarcasm automatic. "It is, actually." Sarah didn't bite at his tone. "It's how we keep this place going. Everyone contributes. Everyone benefits." Mark glanced out the window at the quiet main street. "And what exactly are you keeping going? This town looks like it hasn't changed in 50 years. "That's kind of the point," Sarah said, leaning forward. Not everything needs to constantly upgrade or expand or disrupt the market. Some things are worth preserving as they are. Her words hit uncomfortably close to an argument he'd had with his mother just last month, when she'd questioned why he was expanding the company again instead of enjoying what he'd already built. Sometimes staying the same means falling behind, Mark countered, reciting one of his business mantras. Behind what? Sarah asked. Who are you racing? Before he could answer, a group of teenagers burst into the diner, laughing loudly. Sarah waved at them and they waved back, their ease with her obvious. Friends of yours? Mark asked. I run a reading program at the high school, Sarah explained. Books for troubled teens. Gives them somewhere to belong. Mark watched as the teens settled into a booth, their energy filling the small space. That's nice of you. It's not about being nice, Sarah said. It's about community. Something I'm guessing you don't have much of. Always chasing the next deal. Mark bristled. I have plenty of connections. Connections aren't community, Sarah said simply, finishing her coffee and standing up. The meeting's at 7 at the town hall if you're interested. Otherwise, I'd try the Bluebird Inn down the street for a room. As she turned to leave, Mark found himself reluctant to end their conversation. Maybe I will come, he said impulsively. To the meeting. Sarah looked surprised, then smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. I'll save you a seat. Mark watched her leave, then turned back to his cooling coffee. The diner hummed with conversation around him, a stark contrast to the expensive restaurants where he usually dined alone while checking emails. Here, people actually talked to each other, without a screen between them. His phone wouldn't work, his train wouldn't come until morning, and a woman who ran a small-town bookstore had just challenged his entire worldview. Mark Davis, CEO of Davis Technologies, was completely out of his element. And, strangely enough, he didn't hate it. The Bluebird Inn turned out to be a Victorian-style house with a wraparound porch and flower boxes bursting with color. The elderly woman who owned it, Mary, as Sarah had mentioned, scrutinized Mark over reading glasses before handing him a brass key. Room 3, top of the stairs, she said. Breakfast at 7. Not 6:59, not 7:01. Yes, ma'am, Mark replied, surprising himself with the respectful response. In the city, he would have made a comment about customer service or demanded flexibility. His room was simple but clean, with a patchwork quilt and curtains that matched in a way that suggested careful attention rather than professional design. Mark set his laptop on the antique desk and tried to connect to Wi-Fi, only to discover there wasn't any. With a frustrated sigh, he closed the computer and checked his watch. 6:30. The town meeting would start soon. He debated skipping it, but the thought of sitting alone in this room with nothing but his thoughts wasn't appealing. Besides, Sarah would be there, and something about her intrigued him. Her confidence, maybe, or the way she seemed completely content in this tiny town while he constantly chased more. The town hall was a brick building at the end of Main Street, its steps already filling with people as Mark approached. He felt conspicuously out of place in his tailored suit among their casual attire. Conversations paused as he passed, curious glances following him up the steps. Inside, the meeting room reminded Mark of a small theater, with wooden benches arranged in a semicircle and a podium at the front. He scanned the crowd, feeling oddly vulnerable until he spotted Sarah waving from a bench near the back. Relief washed over him as he made his way to her. "You actually came," she said, making room beside her. "Not much else to do in town," Mark replied, though they both knew that wasn't the whole truth. "If you like this business meeting, wait until you see how wild things get at the bake sale," Sarah whispered as an older man approached the podium. The meeting was unlike any Mark had attended. There were no PowerPoints, no performance metrics, no competition for who could sound the most important. Instead, people discussed real issues: the library's leaking roof, the cost of new playground equipment, sponsoring the high school band's trip. "We're still short about $2,000 for the summer festival," a woman was saying. "The band alone costs $1,200. "We could cancel the fireworks," someone suggested, followed by disappointed murmurs. Without thinking, Mark raised his hand. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Davis Technologies would be happy to sponsor the festival, he said, surprising himself. Consider it a thank you for the town's hospitality. Whispers rippled through the room. The man at the podium blinked in surprise. That's very generous, Mr. Davis, Mark Davis. 3 cheers for Mr. Davis, someone called, and suddenly the room erupted in applause. Sarah was looking at him strangely. That was unexpected. It's just money, Mark shrugged, though the warmth of the town's response felt different from the calculated thank yous he received from corporate donations. After the meeting, people approached to shake his hand and thank him personally. Mark couldn't remember the last time he'd had so many genuine conversations with strangers. No agendas, no business angles, just appreciation. As the crowd thinned, Sarah touched his arm. Some of us are heading to Joe's for a drink. Want to join? Mark checked his watch automatically, then remembered his schedule was meaningless here. Sure. Joe's turned out to be a small pub with wood-paneled walls covered in local sports memorabilia. A jukebox played classic country music, and the bartender greeted Sarah by name. Mark found himself at a table with Sarah and several others from the meeting, a beer in front of him that he hadn't ordered but somehow matched his taste perfectly. So, Mark, said Tom, the taxi owner, what brings a big city CEO to our little town, besides getting on the wrong train? Before Mark could answer, Sarah jumped in. He was supposed to be visiting his mother. Ah, Tom nodded knowingly. Mama Davis must be disappointed. She is, Mark admitted, the guilt returning. She made pot roast. A mother's pot roast is sacred, Tom said solemnly, raising his glass. Here's to making it up to her tomorrow. Everyone clinked glasses, and Mark felt a strange sense of belonging. These people didn't care about his stock options or corporate acquisitions. They cared about how he treated his mother. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to listeners like you. It's absolutely free and means the world to us. Now, let's continue. As the evening progressed, Mark found himself relaxing more than he had in years. The conversation flowed easily from town gossip to deeper topics. When the subject turned to books, Sarah's passion became apparent. We've lost the art of getting lost in a story, she said, gesturing with her glass. Everyone's too busy scrolling to actually read anymore. That's why your programs are so important, Tom said. You're fighting the good fight. What programs? Mark asked, genuinely curious. Sarah's eyes lit up. Besides the teen reading group, I run literacy classes for adults and a mobile library that visits homebound seniors. She shrugged. Not exactly disrupting the market, but it matters here. It sounds meaningful, Mark said softly, thinking of the countless meetings he'd sat through that seemed important at the time, but left no lasting impact. What about you? Sarah asked. What makes your work meaningful? The question caught him off guard. He started to give his standard answer about innovation and market leadership, but something stopped him. In this small pub, surrounded by people who measured success in community impact rather than profit margins, those words felt hollow. I'm not sure anymore, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. I started the company to create something lasting, but lately it's just been about getting bigger. Sarah didn't judge or offer platitudes. She simply nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes we get so caught up in the climb that we forget to look around and enjoy the view. The night air was cool and crisp as Mark and Sarah walked back toward the inn. The streets were quiet now, storefronts dark except for the warm glow of porch lights. Without the city's light pollution, stars blanketed the sky in numbers Mark had forgotten existed. I haven't seen stars like this in years, Mark said, stopping to look up. One of the perks of small-town life, Sarah replied, following his gaze. Some things you can only see when everything else is dark. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the inn. Mark hesitated at the steps, reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you, he said finally, for showing me around, introducing me to everyone. You're welcome, Sarah smiled. Though I think you would have won them over even without my help. That festival donation was pretty smooth. It wasn't a tactic, Mark said, wanting her to understand. It just felt right. Sarah studied him for a moment. I believe you, and that's why you should call your mother more often. Mark laughed, caught off guard by the sudden shift. What does one have to do with the other? Because the Mark Davis who donates to small-town festivals on a whim is probably the son his mother misses. Her words were gentle but landed with precision. Not the CEO who's too busy for pot roast. Before Mark could respond, Sarah had wished him good night and was walking away, her silhouette gradually fading into the darkness of the quiet street. Mark slept better that night than he had in months, the absence of email notifications and city noise creating a silence he'd forgotten could exist. He woke to sunlight streaming through curtains he'd forgotten to close and the smell of bacon wafting up the stairs. After a breakfast where Mary fussed over him like a grandmother, Mark found himself with an hour before his train. On impulse, he walked to Sarah's bookstore, finding her arranging a window display. "Good morning," she said, looking up as the bell above the door announced his arrival. "Ready to return to civilization?" "Apparently," Mark said, though he felt a reluctance he hadn't expected. "I wanted to stop by before I left." Sarah set down the book she was holding. "Find what you were looking for in Pine Creek?" "I wasn't looking for anything," Mark reminded her. "Wrong train, remember?" "Sometimes the wrong train takes you to the right place." Sarah's eyes held his. "Maybe you needed to get lost to find something." "Like what?" Mark asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Perspective, connection, a reminder that there's more to life than quarterly reports." She picked up a book and handed it to him. "Here, for the train ride." Mark looked down at a worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. A subtle hint? Just a good book about a man who needed to step away from society to remember what matters. Sarah smiled. No pressure. Mark tucked the book into his pocket, then pulled out a business card and a pen. He scribbled on the back before handing it to her. "My personal number, in case you ever want to see how the other half lives." "Is that an invitation?" Sarah asked, accepting the card. "It could be, or just a way to say thank you." Mark hesitated, then added, "My company does a charity foundation. We could use someone with your perspective on community programs." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Davis?" "I'm offering you a conversation," Mark clarified. "No wrong trains required." The walk to the station felt different today. Mark noticed things he'd been too preoccupied to see yesterday. The way morning light hit the storefronts, the easy greetings between townspeople, the rhythm of a place that moved at its own pace rather than racing against the clock. At the platform, Tom was waiting with his taxi. "Thought you might need a ride after your train reaches the city," he explained. "My grandkids are having too much fun with their mom to miss me for one more day." "That would be great," Mark said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I know my mother will appreciate it." As the train pulled in, Mark turned for one last look at Pine Creek. He was surprised to see Sarah hurrying toward the platform, something in her hand. "Almost forgot," she said, slightly out of breath as she handed him a paper bag. "Cinnamon rolls from the diner. Your mother shouldn't have to cook after waiting an extra day for you." Mark took the bag, its warmth seeping through the paper into his hands. "Thank you," he said, meaning it for more than just the pastries. "Just don't get on any more wrong trains," Sarah smiled, "unless you mean to." The conductor called for boarding, and Mark reluctantly stepped onto the train. From his window seat, he watched Sarah standing on the platform, her hand raised in farewell as the train pulled away. Opening the book she'd given him, a slip of paper fell out, a handwritten note with her email address and the words, "For when you're ready for that conversation." As the train carried him back toward his other life, Mark thought about his mother waiting with her pot roast, his company with its endless demands, and the unexpected detour that had shown him a different way of measuring success. He thought about Sarah and her quiet confidence, the town that had welcomed him without caring about his title, and the stars you could only see when everything else was dark. His phone buzzed as he came back into service range, notifications flooding in, emails, missed calls, The constant pull of the world he'd built? Mark silenced it and looked out the window instead, watching as the countryside gradually gave way to suburbs, then city. Tomorrow, he would return to being CEO Mark Davis. But today, as he traveled to his mother with Sarah's book in his pocket and cinnamon rolls by his side, he was just a son who had taken the wrong train but somehow ended up exactly where he needed to be. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more unexpected stories. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.